to see you.
Yeah, it's nice to see you. Sorry for your technical problems.
Yeah, I'm just a little complicated on my end, so I had to get a nice private space, and that's not always easy. So,
Oh,
um,
are you at work?
yeah, I'm actually in an office here in where I work. I'm actually a welder, so if you ever need a dumpster, I can weld you.
I have my brother-in-law is from Brandon, Manitoba.
Oh wow, wow.
So I have via him
So,
I know people in Manitoba. So
okay, wow. Small world or something.
it is indeed a small world. Well,
Yeah.
we don't have a lot. Let me just check. My next appointment I think is at 11, so we don't have a ton of time. So let's make use of the time we've got.
Maybe I could start by telling you a little bit something about myself. Like the one guy who once told you he knows a lot about you, and you really don't have an idea where I crawled out of. So I'm actually part of the Hutterite Anabaptist tradition, if you're familiar with that, hence the Spaniards.
Yeah.
So you have quite a diverse audience.
I certainly do. It's amazing. It's really a lot of fun.
Yeah, and what's characteristic about our tradition? We're communitarian, so we live in a community. Pacifist.
Yeah.
I would say we also have sort of more oriented towards works. So what's really important about the Anabaptist tradition is following Jesus and living out the faith. And I think that's a key component. And maybe that's where the Anabaptists and the Calvinists might have a bit of some tension or something. Maybe we could talk about that.
I think traditionally it tends to be about kind of where you locate works in terms of the process of salvation. So it's really more a theological position. We wouldn't want to say that Calvinists don't want to obey Jesus.
Right. and that's the thing. You'll see, we could look at this in the Petersonians, and there are these people who say, okay, it's only grace, but they sure don't act like that, right?
That's
they
exactly
act like
right.
proper Christians. So do they really believe that? So it's an interesting.
No, that's very true. So how did you find Peterson?
How did I find Peterson? Well, my goodness. I think I listened to him a year or two ago. I think I listened to his Transmillennial thing while I was cutting grass. And I was quite scared of him at first. I found him pretty intimidating, but he's really grown on me very much through you in the past few months. And I'm really, like I was telling a friend of mine, I'm really not a high-level Peterson fan at this point, because I haven't listened to all of his biblical lectures and I haven't learned 12 rules for life, but I have been following him quite intently, so I know it. I have a fair grasp of what he's about.
Okay. So, well, your background really helps me better understand. I know you've got a bunch of stuff in the emails that you sent me, and so that really kind of helps me figure out, where you're coming from and where this is at. So where do you want to begin? Because again, we have limited time, so I want to make as good a use of time as we can.
I think we should start with the first question I sent you, if you have a copy of that. But I'm wondering if how I approach that issue is similar to how you think about it, the whole idea of the monarchical vision.
Well, tell me what you've grasped so far, what you think about it.
Okay, so my idea of the monarchical vision is that it's sort of this God's eye view, that where he sort of sees, or from the monarchical vision perspective, there's all of history as one linear progression with no no, it's sort of like you were talking about the three dimensions. The fourth dimension would be the monarchical vision, I think, because you have all of reality just stretched out like a tube, and everything's happening inside one after the other. And my idea is that if this vision, if there's no God, this vision of reality doesn't actually exist. So all we're left with is individuals who are sort of trying to grasp reality and trying to understand what happened in the past and what the good is and what truth is, essentially. And so if there's no monarchical vision, there's really no objective truth about history. I'm following so far. And so all we're essentially left with is individual subjective interpretations of what happened in the past, which are all equally valid because the past isn't real. So that's just an interesting train of thought I've had.
I think you took it in some directions I didn't, but I like the way I like what you did with it. I was kind of looking at it in terms of Sam Harris's objects in space, and the monarchical vision isn't exactly right. It's a God's eye view, but it's a fairly static view. And the fourth dimension, problem is we have two fourth dimensions. The fourth dimension as time, I like, because you integrated that into what you just described, how, now God, exactly, God sees every tree falling in every forest where there is no human seeing it. And part of my critique of the celebrity atheists have been that they trade in this monarchical vision, but they don't actually provide the perspective and the unique perspective that only God could have of this. And so in a sense, what they do is they sit in God's seat, they sit on God's throne, and imagine they're looking down the world like that. And when I listen to them, I think, yeah, but when I say
you can't do that.
What's that?
You can't do that. You can't transcend your subjective cultural construction, essentially. And what I've thought about, there's this big emphasis on scientific consensus. And what that really reminds me of is, okay, here I have an interpretation of history. I have an interpretation of history. And that's all band together. We can create this Tower of Babel and come up and we can have this objective view. Because we all have our subjective interpretations, but if we can come together and get a majority, the majority becomes God. And
that's right.
You see that everywhere. You see that in ethics. If more people agree, that's what's the good. See that in truth. If we agree, that's the good. And what's the fourth one? I'm thinking in terms of transcendentals. The good, the true, and the beautiful. And I haven't completely integrated the beautiful into this whole argument. So maybe you can help me with that.
Well, I think the fact that it's difficult to integrate the beautiful into that argument exposes the difficulties of subjectivity inherent with that approach, just like you described.
Well, do you think beauty is something objective?
Right, and I think beauty is objective, but objective beauty cannot exist without the subjective. By nature, beauty integrates both of those things. And that's why I love, I'm thinking, boy, get this guy a book contract. You've got some great ideas and some great ways of articulating it, because I think you're dead on right what you just described to me. And that's why beauty, well, how you cannot, you're going to crowdsource beauty. You can do a degree. And let's say someone like OkCupid, so they have all of these pictures out there, and OkCupid complains that they're trying to match people. And all of the men say, I want to go out with her. So there is a hierarchy, but it's more complex than that, because if you're looking at a two-dimensional picture, well, all of those pictures, again, have been taken out of time, and it exactly illustrates the falseness of the monarchical vision that the objectivists state, because God can actually see all of this within time and see it without bias. And now someone might say, well, God therefore is, you're defining God. And that then gets into my ontological argument where I say, yeah, but if there is no such God, then we're exactly where what you described. That
Right. But
we're all lost in our subjectivity. And then what science kind of becomes, and not even science, but history becomes, is, well, a group of us can agree upon a least common denominator, and we'll go with that because that's the best.
Right. And there were sort of two objections I came up with that. The first one is if you take a B theory of time, where, have you heard about this, where time, like the monarchical vision of time, where the past, the present, and the future are all equally real, like they exist out there somewhere, we could have a monarchical vision in some sense. Because if you take the correspondence theory of truth, here's my proposition about the past. Let's say this hypothetical figure, John, existed in 500 AD. Okay, we can point to that in the in this tube-like vision. Yeah. So on the B theory, I think we would avoid these problems, at least in an ontological sense.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
No, I think you're very much right. And see, what I really like about the way you've sketched it out here is you show, I mean, you very complex. What kind of education do you have?
I'm really interested in philosophy, grade 12. Yeah, it's just something that interests me. Like, I graduated last year, then I came back and did a Western civilization course. It's a bit complicated how that works, but I sent you my essay for the end of the year on epistemology, which just a fascinating topic. Just the whole truth and epistemology. My goodness.
Well, you've definitely got a talent for it. I can see that, and you should continue to develop your talent, because
wow, thanks.
it's
Yeah.
this is what's been fun about these conversations, is that we have these hierarchies, and those hierarchies filter and limit.
Yeah.
And hierarchies, corrupt isn't exactly the right word, but let's use Jordan Peterson, for example. So he's rocketed up this hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
What that does is it closes him off from conversations with people like you.
Right. I was thinking I should find myself a lower hierarchy, Jordan Peterson, so that I can have a conversation with him.
That's right. I'm a B list. I'm a C or a D list Jordan Peterson. That's exactly what I've been doing. And
it's probably so weird to you that suddenly you have Hunter Wrights from Manitoba cramming to have a conversation with you just the last couple of months.
But it's really beautiful, because again, it's so helpful to me, because I get these little inklings of ideas and I vomit them on all of you on the internet, and you pick apart and you say, hey, wait a minute, this is cool, and you construct it and you see it in a way I haven't seen it, and then you give it back to me and it's like, oh wow, that's great. So I should stop emoting and get back down to the work of it. So no, I think, do you blog or anything? I mean, part of the thing is, like, there's the written world and then there's the spoken world. And so, and this is all part of this, because obviously with a God view of the universe, all of that is integrated. Mm-hmm. And no human being can integrate. So therefore we use community to try to transcend the limitations of our subjective perspective. And then we use communication and language to try to facilitate that transcending of it. But
and another interesting thing about language, I was reading Neil Postman, and his point was that even language has sort of this ideology infused into it. And he made this point about how there's Japanese and there's English, and Japanese is actually a language inadequate for the scientific worldview. You can't articulate the scientific ideas as well in Japanese as in English. So it's sort of like there's this culture that emerges, and this language is suited specifically for this culture. And within our tradition, we speak a Hungarian dialect. Like this is a sort of a German dialect. And like our foreparents started out in Moravia in Germany, then wandered all throughout Germany, and then finally came to North America. So we speak this weird language that has elements from all of the different regions we walk through. And today we're just speaking this conglomeration that's slowly being infused by English. And that's really tragic because this language is intimately suited for our culture. Like it expresses our way of looking at the world in a way that can't be replaced. It has this constructiveness, like this Jordan Peterson way that he expressed, evolving out of time, and if you know what I mean.
No, I know exactly what you mean. And it's so cool.
It's just...
It is so cool. And I see exactly what you mean, that, you know, because, and also all of us, not only do we have at this moment our perspective, which is subjective in time and the limitations, but all of our histories are built into this. And what I love about your story, I mean, similar to my story, I come from the Christian Reformed Church, which has its own particularities, and then the Dutch immigration, but my father's side was Jewish. Who knows what was going on with them? My mother's side was Frisian, so another tiny little sub-ethnic group with its own language, but then the social dynamics. And, you know, again, in history, all of this stuff comes through. And so then when I talk to atheists, and they're like, and they're like, well, there's no God.
Active human being.
Yes. I think if there is not someone watching and remembering and knowing this absolutely glorious thing called the story of humanity, this should be a loss that completely crushes us, because it is just an unfathomable loss. Maybe I'm evoking my inner Nietzsche here, you know, in that God is dead and you're all killing him. Stop it.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's, you know, and I love, and you embody in this story, you know, think of what you embody in this story. It's magnificent.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I should stop. I watched a conversation I did before, and I thought I talk too much. I got to shut up.
That's fine.
I talk plenty. I need to shut up more.
You're the old and wise one, so
no. I'm maybe just old, but old and foolish enough to start a YouTube channel.
That's right.
So you've got all these ideas. What are you doing with these ideas? How old are you?
I'm 19.
Oh, gosh.
So, what I started a few months ago was a little journal. So I try to write in it every day, and you're just watching your channel is just making me go off in all kinds of directions, and it's just wonderful. And
so are you going to go to college? I mean, you're studying, you're taking some things. Go to college. I'm not going to ask you. I'll tell you. Go to college.
I'm kind of frustrated with the whole institutional learning thing right now. So right now I'm just sitting down and reading all my books and listening to my podcasts and my videos and enjoying that immensely. So,
well, here's
the other day, just if I can interrupt, the other day.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. The other day I was kind of counting up how many hours of information consumption was going on in a single day. And this is a bit of an extreme case, but I counted about 12 hours of podcasts, reading, and watching videos. And that's just insane. And especially from a Neil Postman perspective.
You're living the new education.
Well, and
the irony is, and this is something you should think through and make your decisions. Obviously, it's your life; you're going to make decisions. But it might be that you can get a better education doing what you're doing. The downside is no one will know you, and you won't have access to the kinds of hierarchies that could enable you to not only know things and keep them in your head, but one of the things that I have discovered in this, in terms of people writing to me, is all the brilliant people out there that nobody knows about. And there's many of them. There's
well, I would at least love to have conversations with them. That's a plus. So
yeah, and I can't talk to Jordan Peterson because he's too busy, because he's in a hierarchy, but I can talk to you, and you can talk to me. And now I'm getting in a hierarchy, and so this frustrates me, because you can't, it's hard to say no to the hierarchy, but because it affords more opportunity,
right.
But you're also limited to opportunity, and Jordan Peterson didn't have a chance to sit down with you, and that's his loss.
And mine for sure. Right. And I lost my, just, we were talking about information and how I consume 12 hours of information a single day. And what I'm realizing is that that's way too much, because you don't have the time to process it. And it's really difficult to, I'm also finding out that I'm really a very bad thinker. Like, this is something Peterson talks about all of the time. Somehow he's advanced to the level where he can have these 2 or 3 different personalities fighting out in his head over an idea. And that's just not something I can do in my head. I need to have a conversation with someone or write it down, but I really like to develop the whole thinking thing. So.
But you're only 19. Your brain hasn't even finished developing.
Well, I hope not, because I don't want to have this kind of a brain for the rest of my life. Long way to go.
But that capacity that Peterson talks about, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a doctor, I only play one on YouTube. But I suspect, the continued development that your brain is going to go through from 19 to 25-ish, that it's those higher level of functionings where you'll be able to, in a sense, differentiate the voices in your head and the community of watchers that you have and talkers that will continue to develop. So, but you're right. So you're stewarding your own education, which means that you're not limited by some of the hierarchies, but you're also, it's very hard to know what's best.
Yeah, and with Peterson's old critique of the universities, there's another thing to keep in mind, I guess.
Well, and I recommend, my kids don't always listen to me. 2 of my kids have gone to Calvin College. I do recommend that people take a look at religious universities. Now, part of the reason for that is, so what I think we have going on in the country is this progressive liberationism, which I've talked about before. That is, in a sense, a religious structure. Okay? That's an ideology. It's a religion. Yeah. What's happening, what you have, at least at religious colleges, is that there's at least competition between an old religion and the new one. And what I see happening, for example, in the Christian Reformed Church, you've got old and new ideologies battling itself out. Whereas I think what has happened in a lot of public universities is that they have no resistance to the new civil religion. And that pretty much is what Peterson is complaining about. And I think he's right. At least at a religious university, there's another powerful perspective within the university that says, not so fast there, progressive liberationism. We're going to critique some of what you're asserting here. And
some of them, I guess, but again, some I would guess some of the Christian universities would completely go along with the progressive liberationism, because they can see some of the positive aspects and they just ride along with the whole thing. Yeah.
But if you have a conservative religious tradition like your own, like mine, there's resistance to it. And at least, good, bad, right, or wrong, conservatism at least gives the past a voice and resists the tyranny of the immediate.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's something I want to touch on a little later. I'd like to go back to our discussion of the monarchical vision.
Yep.
So we were talking about how the majority decides the ethical. And this brings me to a really interesting thing I read from Kierkegaard in trying to work my way through his concluding unscientific postscript. And it's sort of like chasing a hound or something, because sometimes you catch him and then he just gets away. It's hard to follow what on earth he's talking about most of the time, but sometimes I get these little diamonds. And he was talking about how people confuse the historical with the ethical. So this very progressive liberationist thing where what happens in the past is history will judge you, essentially. So this idea that the movement of history shows what the ethical course of action is. And this also reminds me of sort of what the new atheist conception of ethics is, and it's really different from what ethics actually is. They seem to think that ethics is equivalent to human flourishing, or ethics, the good is equivalent to what works or what helps promote survival. And that really isn't the case, because I don't think the good can be reduced to pleasure or pain or survival or non-survival. And what Kierkegaard says is, he talks about how there needs to be this single individual who stands alone and pursues the good, seeks to follow after God, seeks to follow after Jesus, irrespective of what if history smiles upon him or how people in the future will think of him. He needs to pursue the good courageously and not care what other people will think. And I think I've gone on long enough. You forget my entire train of thought.
Oh, you're doing well.
I was thinking of this in light of Peterson. Peterson is sort of doing this. He's sort of this individual who stands alone, and yet he's on top of the hierarchy. He has these millions of people following him. And we see all of the criticism, so we think he's standing alone, but is he really, right? Is he really that alone? Is he really that courageous? And I think this is something he said himself. So any thoughts on that?
Well, I think you're exactly right. And this again gets back to the difficulty of the limitations of our capacity to see and to apprehend. Is he alone? In some ways, yes. In many ways, no. Mm-hmm. And reality is often like that. It's yes and no. And so is he alone? Well, he feels like a lone voice out there, because there are many powerful institutions and what I think in a New Testament, Jonathan Pachot, I think nicely laid out, principalities and powers out there that are standing against him. And part of what's so heroic about the Jordan Peterson story is that in a sense, it's one dude taking on the New York Times and the university industrial complex.
And what really impresses me about that is, if I listen to the ideas that he promotes and just the whole conservative Christian message he brings across, it really amuses me to think of what the far left types must be thinking, that this is a message that's going mainstream. It's just quite astounding to think, okay, Peterson is saying something, everybody hears it, and wow, like this is mainstream. I can't imagine what the far left types are thinking about this.
And in that way, so often the left elite keeps drinking its own Kool-Aid and keeps suffering from its own delusions. And whatever you think of Donald Trump, what the election of Trump exposed was their pretense and their belief in their own religion, and it exposed their religion to say, no, you don't have it. You have not captured the world and history by the tail.
History hasn't ended yet. Yeah.
Nope.
Which is quite the thought, that we are not at the end of history.
No, we are not. and our grasp, and I think, again, you said it, you articulated it beautifully, that the grasp of history, our grasp of history is so, I mean, we know so little. And
here's another thing. I don't know if you're all that familiar with Stefan Molyneux, but I was listening. I don't really like that guy. He's whatever. So I was listening to one of his podcasts with Stephen Hicks. Have you run across Stephen Hicks?
I've heard his name. I haven't really gotten into much of him, no.
But he wrote this book, Understanding Postmodernism.
Okay.
And he went on his podcast and they were talking about postmodernism, and he outlined this I call it the mythological history of the new atheist times. And it's sort of like people were stupid and barbaric and religious and superstitious, and then suddenly enlightenment and pure reason fell upon a divine individual, reason incarnate, I guess, which would be somebody like Kant or Bacon or whoever. Or no, not Kant. Kant is one of the bad guys, I found out. So it falls upon this divine individual, and just like there's no pretext to this reason falling on this. It just happens in one revolutionary moment, and then suddenly we were enlightened, and then we moved towards this beautiful utopian future of the divine individual, etc. And like there's this completely ideological conception of history, and it's just so outlandish. And you can compare that to the postmodern conception of history. There's just power games, or then maybe what your conception of history or my conception of history and your cultural perspective. You have your Dutch Reformed tradition history, and that plays in. And so everybody sees their little slice and their little ideologically possessed version of history.
And we all critique the others from where we stand. And the hubris of modernity is exactly what you articulated, that here finally we have the tools where they confuse the limited vision they have, and they dress it up and say, this is the monarchical vision. We now see all.
Right.
And in a sense, what Peterson comes along and says is, oh, that's a bunch of crap. You're not beginning to see all. And in fact, you're forgetting what you say you're supposed to know, because if you actually paid attention, you would realize that the more you're learning, the more you don't know. And as in that Neil deGrasse Tyson video that I played, the more you know, the larger the frontier is, because by knowing A, now I see that I don't know B, C, and D. Well, now I know A and B, so A and B all have three windows into the world we don't know. So the more you know, that the amount that you now know you don't know expands exponentially. And
here's another point that I think this comes from Thomas Kuhn. Have you read his book? I should read his book.
Yes, you should read his book. I read it in college. That's a place that I spent a lot of money and wasted a lot of time, but you seem to be able to do it a lot cheaper. So go ahead, definitely read his book.
Well, try out Thrift Books. Have you heard of Thrift?
It's been around a long time. You can probably get it for nothing.
Well, there's this online website called Thrift Books, and you can get books for really cheap. That's what I use. So his idea that the scientific paradigm sort of is a worldview in itself, where you kind of see the world through the scientific paradigm and interpret the evidence to fit this paradigm, and just check out the evidence that doesn't fit. And eventually this starts piling up, and you have to create a new paradigm. So there's limitations to the scientific worldview as well.
Oh, and that's at heart. You can see within Kuhn the resonance of the postmodern critique. That the postmodern critique is essentially the critique that the Dutch Calvinists critique the modernists. Well, they do so from their own perspective, and they have their own biases, and the limitations of the Dutch Calvinists are exposed in the critique that the Dutch Calvinists give to the modernists, let's say. But as C.S. Lewis said, well, you can keep seeing through things, and if you just keep doing that, you'll never see anything. The point of seeing through something is to actually see what's there. And I think Peterson rightly then critiques the postmodernists and says, yeah, but your critique eats itself and leaves us awash. And there's another great article I picked up from Tim Keller that basically one artist going through all of the postmodernity saying, then all it then just comes down to is money. It's the only thing that money is finally the only religion that we all really can agree on. And which, of course, to me as a Christian sets up Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus says you can't serve two masters, doesn't say God and Satan or Christianity and Judaism or Jesus and Caesar. He says God and mammon or, money. And it's like, wow. Back down to this. And who would have thought that we would find this writing from a man who lived in the first century and still find it relevant? Then we're back to Jordan Peterson. No, Christ is the ideal person. And it's like, yeah, that's what Christianity's been saying all along.
Nice. So here's another thought. If we reject the monarchical vision, like we said, we're left with these individual subjects. And you've talked about the iron box of naturalism. You could say the iron box of the self, because you really can't get out of that. Right. And it seems to me one of the disagreements between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson is that, okay, they see that we're all these individuals. And we need something to unite us so that we can get this hierarchy of the majority and get our way to consensus truth. And yeah, this is also why Jordan Peterson maybe is a pragmatist, because it works well enough if we band together and get our own conception of truth. It works well enough. So it seems to me that the difference between Peterson and Harris is that Harris thinks that what unites these individuals is reason. If we all use this innate capacity to reason, we can reach consensus, and that's how we can gain our truth and our morality and our beauty, maybe. And what Peterson thinks unites us, and you know more about Peterson than me, so maybe you can correct me, is we have this shared evolutionary history, and we're all built up in the same way, and we all have these archetypes that work themselves in the same way. We all have the same constructedness, and there are these truths or these archetypes we can use to see what's the best mode of being for all of us. What's the most pragmatic way to live that gets us the best society. So there's sort of this constructed, this tried and true pragmatism and this united reason between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson. How does that sound?
No, that's correct. And see, now what pragmatism, so Peterson often recommends a book, the Metaphysical Club. And so you can throw that on your book list.
Yeah, it is in my book list.
Oh, it's a good book, and I haven't finished it, but I've taken a number of whacks at it. I've ADHD.
Books?
I'm always off to the next book, and I got to get back to the Metaphysical Club, and it's like, I want to go back and start that again, because anyway.
Can I just interject here? Sorry. Do you think you reading so many books at a time is sort of that? Does that sort of come from this information age where there's just so much information bombarding you that you can't keep track of everything? Or could you point to yourself 20, 30 years ago and see the same habit manifesting itself?
I think I know I'm ADHD, I'm dyslexic, I've got learning disabilities. And if you listen to Jonathan Peugeot had a conversation with another University of Toronto professor, Verkijk. I can't help but say his name in the Dutch way because that's what it looked. But he has some very interesting ideas about attention, and he and Peugeot talk about that. And there's some other lectures of his. Attention is, there's more going on in attention than we tend to dismissively appreciate. Our minds are, again, where our conscious self is a small thing, and our whole minds are smarter than our conscious self. And now, I connect this with God because I'm a theist. Mm-hmm. But I often find that reading some of one book and then reading some of another book, it helps me do some integration. And I often find that the mix which seems random, now again, for human beings, random is a word for too complex for us to see. That seems random, actually in some ways is probably my subconscious. I'm reading this and I'm thinking, oh, my subconscious is itching in a place, and I think, well, I'm going to read that over there. And then I'll often find, is it pattern recognition? Am I just fooling myself? But if I take these two things and I put them together, well, then there's kind of a new thing, and I can see it from a different perspective, and on I go. And so that's part of the reason why I read this one book for a while, then I read another book, and I think, well, I don't know if anybody else is reading these two books right now, but I can see they're helping me see the world through the angularity, the combination of these two things. So
fascinating.
That's often what I do. What were we talking about before?
Oh, man.
Oh, crap.
You were talking about all the books you read.
Yeah, right before that.
Okay, we were talking about Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris with these different conceptions of how we unite these individuals.
Pragmatism.
Right, there we go.
The beauty of pragmatism, and again, if you look at Charles Peirce and the Metaphysical Club and how when they discovered statistics, the beauty of pragmatism says things are too complex for us to handle. Not only our limited brains, but even our systems, which tend to expand the power of our brains. Therefore, because the world is too complex, we need a strategy for simplification. And that's essentially what pragmatism is. It says we are going to simplify it. So, for example, MPEG-3 compression for audio files. That is a lossy audio file compression. Now you can use FLAC, which is lossless, but before there was FLAC, there was MP3, and basically said MP3 will give you a file that's good enough. And that's essentially pragmatism. And so what you're exactly right, that Harris says, I've got this vision for rationality, and via rationality we can establish and we can have the monarchical vision. Okay, that's what Sam Harris says. Peterson looks at that and says, no, you're never going to get there. We're not going to get beyond pragmatism because the universe is too complex. The thing that Sam Harris isn't recognizing, which Thomas Nagel really points his finger out and that everybody wants to ignore, is, okay, Sam Harris, let's imagine you achieve a monarchical vision. Well, what does that make you? Do you think what are you going to do with Steven Pinker, who maybe you, and this gets back to your articulation of kind of this community of agreement, well, okay, so Sam Harris and Steven Pinker are the two eyes. Well, monarchical vision only allows one. It's a king. Monarchy, monarchy. A little bit of Greek helps. So at some point, this is what's always hilarious, is the celebrity atheists say, these religious people can't agree. And I think, and you guys are?
Right.
So if Sam Harris establishes a monarchical vision via rationality, he becomes God. And as a religious person, I say, yeah, there's a long history of us wanting to be God. and it starts in a garden with a man and a woman and a tree. And so this is where Peterson. So what's lovely about Peterson is I think he recognizes the complexity that religious systems have always engaged with. And so when he reads the Bible, in a sense, and what he says, you know what, this is, and I've laid this out in my previous few videos. If you really want to know humanity, you need as much data as possible. And this idea that via psychology we will know ourselves, psychology and sociology, well, that's what those do. Is it's the lie of the scientific monarchical vision. Because they don't have near enough data.
And here's the thing. Here's the thing about psychology and medicine. It seems to ignore the fact that, like we said, each individual is constructed from a specific historical past, from a specific cultural context, etc. You can add infinite amount of tiny little things that differentiate individuals. And now you want to take the averages across these individuals and construct something that's going to fit each of these separate individuals. Forget it. And again, they're trying to take this average and get this monarchical vision, and it's just not going to fly.
No. And I think part of what's happened now is via Peterson, we are learning enough to know that this system that we put our faith in won't get us there. And that's what Peterson's exposing. And so the likes of Sam Harris, they're at the end, that the asteroid is coming, baby. It's gonna hit. You're a dinosaur. And sorry, the old you had a nice run, but really World War I killed you, and you just haven't recognized that you're done.
Yeah. And that's it seems to me the new atheist modernist types really haven't owned up to the postmodern critique at all. And it just always strikes me as naive or something when they continue to just articulate these things that have been talked about since the 1800s, and you just need to get more sophisticated.
Yeah. And Sam's trying. You know, he's got consciousness, and he's doing psychedelics, and it's like, well, I can be cool. I can do consciousness. I shouldn't be flippant and mean, but you're gonna get a lot of thumbs down on this video. but that's how I, and he looks at me and says, "Oh gosh, you're an Iron Age religionist," and I'd say, "Yeah, but you know what? You can learn a little something from the Iron Age, because that was as real as 2018."
And another thing about the Christian worldview that fits with this is that somehow it manages to fit into every culture and every different time period. It manages to twist its way into this culture and fit. You can have modernist Christians, you can have postmodernist Christians, you can have African Christians, you can have whatever. It just fits with every situation.
No, that's right. And the craziest thing, the Bible, blah, blah, blah. The craziest thing I find about the Bible, I've told this story before, so missionary goes into the jungles of Vietnam and translates the Bible into their language, but then the war breaks out, so has to leave, and leaves them, first helps them, first gives them, written text, because all they did was speak their language, gives them written text, and then teaches them how to read, and then translates probably only the New Testament or maybe the whole Bible in their language, gives it to them, and then leaves. And the people start to read it, and they do something with it. Mm-hmm. Go to that, translate, give them a copy of, give them a copy of a chemistry text, translate it and give it to them. They're going to use it for toilet paper or to burn. I had no use for it.
Mhm, mhm.
And so the crazy, and this is where Peterson's kind of Darwinian view of ideas, that there's a reason no other book in all of human history is anywhere close to having being read, translated, and studied and propagated as this particular book.
Mhm.
We don't know why. And then Jesus says, you know, my words won't pass away. And it's kind of like, true so far. How do you
Yeah.
account for that?
Mhm, mhm.
So it's a crazy, crazy thing. All right, we've got 10 more minutes.
Yeah, when we could make a quick transition um, to the postmodern conversation. One thing I've been thinking about is that Jordan Peterson really likes to critique the postmodernists, but he's definitely not a modernist, and he's definitely been influenced to a great degree by the postmodern critique. If you look at his, obviously his pragmatic definition of truth, what was the second one? This whole idea of constructiveness. That's really not a. It's a very postmodern idea that we are constructed by our culture and our history and our society, etc. And just his whole battle with the meaninglessness of life and his recognition of the full consequences of the death of God. And it seems to me that that's not something that the modernists have grappled with, because they seem to have killed the God number two, this God, this object in the sky. They've shot him down with their arrows, but they haven't dealt with the monarchical vision, the real problems associated with killing God. It seems to me that if you look at God, is sort of the foundation of truth, of goodness, of beauty, and they've sort of blown out the foundation, and these things are just hovering in midair, and they want to keep them anyway. And the postmodernists come along. You have actually no right to these hovering Platonic ideals. Like it's sort of this Platonic definition of truth, this Platonic definition of goodness, this Platonic definition of beauty. Well, you have no right to these things. They just blow out of the sky, and we're left with the meaninglessness. And now Peterson comes along, he sees this landscape, and he wonders, okay, what can we do? How can we fix this problem? So,
no, I think I think you articulated it very, very well. Peterson is hard to categorize. He's got enough modernism in him. He's got enough postmodernism. He's got some pragmatism. And when he says to Sam Harris, you haven't taken Nietzsche into account. That's what you just articulated is exactly that point, that they really haven't figured out what Nietzsche has said,
or Thomas Kuhn,
nor Dostoevsky.
Mm-hmm.
Those are huge critiques of that perspective, and that they're just not aware of it. But that's, again, that reflects our incapacity to actually attain this monarchical vision. You can't. We've got 24 hours a day. We've got to use at least a third of them just to survive. There's so much to process. You can't know it all. And even if you, like you say, you can spend, you're working a blue collar job. You've got, which is affording you lots of time to listen to stuff. Part of me is jealous because I don't have as much time to process stuff as I used to. Everybody wants to talk to me. It's like, that's stupid hierarchy.
But at the same time, there's really no better way of processing information and throwing out ideas and seeing if they come back dead than having an actual conversation, because it's really like Jordan Peterson says, if you can't have these 2 or 3 people fighting it out in your head, well, you really got to find a physical person and just throw ideas back and forth.
Oh, it's my 11 o'clock. He's early.
Well, we can throw his perspective in here too, I guess.
That's right. So I'm just gonna have to keep recording now, because so Lars, meet Julian. Julian, meet Lars.
Hi, Lars.
Are you live? Can we hear you, Julian?
Yes. Oh, you mean Lars?
Lars, sorry, Lars, can I hear it? There's a little, on the lower left hand, there's a little, if you move the mouse, you'll want to probably unmute yourself.
Well, here's one more question I had. I guess I could throw this one out. Thinking about the relationship between Jordan Peterson and this sort of progressive liberationist worldview. I was thinking, does Jordan Peterson's definition of belief not map on perfectly to the unconscious bias definition of racism? If what we act out is what we believe, doesn't that make people who perform microaggressions racist regardless of what they say on the topic of race? So there's an interesting thought.
That's a very interesting thought.
And here's another way of looking at it. Peterson likes to talk about how the Christian worldview has really shaped society. So we're completely, we have all of these positive elements coming in from the Christian worldview. But what about, he seems to completely forget the negative things that could come as a result of history. If you look at white supremacy in the United States, that's 200, 300 years of, I'm not familiar with the history, of racism, of segregation, of slavery, etc. And isn't that going to build itself into society, build itself into the collective psyche? Isn't that going to have a constructive negative impact that we also want to fight against?
That's right. And this is where the social justice warriors have a point when they say American culture is white supremacist. It's that way in the same way that Sam Harris is a Christian. It's a similar argument. And so what you have to do is, if you look at, say, white privilege, I like to say white privilege is it's a helpful meme, but not a helpful way of life. In the sense of that as a meme, it helps expose the fact that if you have black skin in America, there is a cost. And
Sure.
That's true. And it's helpful for white people to recognize that. Having said that, and this is where Peterson gets involved in the monk debate, he says, okay, I'll buy it. What's the tax? Can you put $1 on it? And this is the problem that postmodernity has, and it's a general problem that we have. It's easier for us to see a problem than to address the problem.
And if I can jump sort of again for interrupting, but this postmodernist social justice warrior worldview is really just another low definition way of looking at the world. And I think this is something really brilliant that Peterson brought up in the monk debate. You have this worldview, this collective social justice type worldview, and you have this individual worldview. And both of them don't completely get at the whole picture. If you, I think this is true of white privilege as well. If you look at all of the individuals who are white, whatever white means, I mean, this is a critique I would have. If you want to say black is a social construction, it doesn't really exist. Does the same go for whiteness?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, and so you have all of these white individuals, and there's all kinds of different factors that play upon these white individuals. They have Dutch descent, they are Christian, they're gay, they're transgender, whatever. They have all kinds of different. Essentially, an individual is this membership of many different groups, and this is what makes this individual an individual. He's a unique conglomeration of groups. So you want to say that all of these unique individuals who are parts of many different groups all have this white privilege. It seems to be very low resolution, because quite evidently your experience of whiteness is different than mine, and maybe different than Lars's, and maybe different than this hick guy out of Southern America or whatever. So it's really low resolution.
That's exactly right. And Peterson talking to David Fuller in his last conversation with him that David put up on Rebel Wisdom, Peterson makes that point. He said, each of us I am an oppressor and I'm oppressed. I have white privilege and I have, well, what are we going to call it? We're going to call it white liability. And in fact, as soon as the assertion of white privilege is made and finds traction in the culture, I now have white liability too. And we have to negotiate both the privilege and the liability. And hierarchies naturally begin to integrate these things. And so, no, that's, and you're exactly right that, you know, the conversations that we are seeing, that they're too low resolution. And again, what Peterson is trying to say is we have to, if we're going to survive, we're going to have to improve the resolution and actually deal with them. So.
Yeah.
Well, Julian, your time is up and Lars is beginning. So.
Yeah. Thank you. That was a wonderful conversation.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to do it again. And
I think so.
And I think I would love to share this conversation with your permission.
Let me think about that.
You think about it. What I'll do is I will send you a video file and an audio file of this conversation. You can look at it, and after looking at it and pondering it, if you say, I don't want it to be public, it won't be public.
Okay.
If you say, no, this is helpful, send it back to me. I'll post it, and we'll go from there.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julian.
Very nice meeting you.